Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 4th of September, already into one of the fall months. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your changing weather situation across Alaska. You can easily find your forecast around Alaska at 1-800-472-0391. Online, that's weather.gov/Alaska. And if you can't find what you want there, feel free to email me anytime, david.snider@noaa.gov. It's an easy way to get more information about something you can't find, something you don't know how to use, or if you're just having a little bit of trouble understanding the weather that you're seeing where you are. We'd love to see a picture of your village and your community. Perhaps we'll even share it here on Alaska Weather. Let's get right to it. Here's a look at the Chandeleur Shelf. You're looking southward towards some of the hills there, and certainly low deck of clouds across the region today. Looks like probably VFR conditions there, but certainly flirting with marginal conditions from time to time in some of the passes. Temperatures were hovering in the upper 40s and low 50s for a good part of the daytime today, so no doubt that low clouds will be settling in a little bit more tonight. As you'll see in the flying weather pictures here coming up in just a few minutes there, it looks like that'll be a trend for most of the week there. A look down the road toward Arctic Village, a north view up toward the hills and the Brooks Range, and you can see some of the changing color of the tundra there. A beautiful afternoon for colors there, but certainly a lot of lower clouds and pretty steady and solid ceiling there as we go throughout the day. So not a whole lot going to change there across the Arctic Village region, but hello to everyone there in Arctic Village. Our very best to you on this fine Tuesday. Here's a look at temperatures across the region as we go into the fall season now. What we want to talk about is where is this cold going? In many locations across the interior, conditions have been cooling down, but here's some of the numbers that might be useful to you. This is not the average day of the first frost, rather it's the average day of the first 32-degree report at this weather station. And you can see in Gulkena, we've already passed that. In fact, in August, we hit the temperature at or even below 32 degrees twice. So we're past Gulkena. You're in the clear there. It's already been cold enough and below freezing for you. But for Talkeetna, that averages today. Kenai, that would be Thursday there if my live TV math is correct. Homer and Cordova a little bit later on into September, around the 19th, one day later in Valdez, and Anchorage in the region around the 23rd of September. Now, of course, the west and east side of Anchorage, very different. The eastern side is going to be a lot colder, a lot earlier. In fact, temperatures were pretty close to freezing in some places earlier this morning. Palmer, similar conditions there, September 23, Seward, October 1st, and Kodiak, way out, about a month and change from now, so we got some time. Temperatures this week across South Central will be hovering in the mid-30s to mid-40s. Places like Gulkena, though, probably closer to that 30-degree mark as we get into your Wednesday and Thursday. But just as soon as we start talking about freezing temperatures, we also know that fire weather season has ended. So we're not going to be talking about the fire weather conditions or fire danger anymore until late next spring or early next summer, depending on how much water is coming our way. So good news, you made it. Hopefully conditions were okay for you this season and nothing bad happened where you were. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. One thing to pick out is the northbound clouds here, the westbound clouds here, and the southbound clouds here. This means we have an omega block in the upper atmosphere. That means low pressure on either side, an upside down shape U pattern. It looks like kind of an angry octopus when you see the jet stream map here in a minute. And that is a sign that we're in a very stable and blocking pattern. Weather will be going all the way around the ridge, but not cutting through it until conditions change on either side and can break that down. We do have low pressure just off the coast of southern southeast. We have low pressure across the North Pacific and the western Bering Sea. Both of these systems, they're not terribly strong, but they're certainly not very weak either. This one's sloshing rainfall into southern parts of the Panhandle. The one out west is sloshing in a little bit of rain across the western Bering, but certainly bringing in stronger winds to the central chain. That'll be a focus for turbulence as we head into tomorrow. And then across the north, we pretty much have westbound winds moving across the north slope. That is going to be doing a couple things. First, moving wet and snowy weather at times across the north slope in the higher terrain and at times across the northern interior. But it's also going to be moving the ice from west to east across the north slope and the coastline. As it does that, we'll see the wraparound winds coming in from the north and then taking any ice that it's moved and loosened up here and then bringing that back towards shore as we get closer to the end of the week. So something to keep your eye on there, especially from Prudhoe Bay all the way out toward AKwx. We'll have the ice update for you here in just a few minutes. Today's surface drought has high pressure across northern Yukon and the Northwest Territories. We're around 1,024 millibars. Low pressure here across the eastern Gulf at 1,029 millibars. We've got southerly winds blowing in here and just focusing the rainfall across some of our southern archipelago islands. High pressure sitting across the North Pacific just south of the Alaska Peninsula, 1,033 millibars for you. That's giving a lot of south central, all the way from the Copper River Valley to Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, even Bristol Bay. Northerly winds, very dry winds coming in off of some of the higher terrain for most of south central and Kodiak Island. For Bristol Bay region, it's just a lot of dry air sitting right there. A beautiful day for many locations here on the southern end. Out west, there's our next low pressure system at 1,008 millibars. Again, this is bringing in that southerly flow, a lot of cloud cover, and the opportunity for some rainfall or some fog, depending on how close you are to high pressure. And of course, we're talking about St. Paul and St. George with that. Up north, you can see the weather systems lined up on either side. Unsettled weather with rainfall around AKwx and certainly around the Fairbanks region. A lot of that higher terrain stuff right now. Low pressure moving across from eastern Russia will jump right across the Chukchi Sea later tonight, and a frontal boundary sitting across the Brooks Range will be the focus for rainfall and certainly plenty of clouds, as we just saw from our FAA weather cameras there. Low pressure across the North Pacific keeps that southerly flow going across most of the central and western Aleutians tonight. High pressure doesn't budge, but underneath that ridge, of course, we know those two dashed lines mean areas of fog under that very stable and somewhat clear sky above. Fog will probably form later on tonight. Showers across the upper Yukon Valley and across the Alcan border up and down from north to south. Frontal boundary banked up against the Brooks Range later tonight will be the focus for rain showers there. The pink colors that were coming back into our maps a little bit more routinely in the last week or so, that means a mixture of rain and snow. So the other color that you'll see eventually will be blue, and that will indicate snow on our maps as we go forward into the season. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf, 1,007 millibars there, still sloshing in some rain across the Dixon entrance and into Clarence Strait, but by and large, most of the mainland will be dry as we head through tonight. Tomorrow, low pressure still moving generally eastward there. It's allowing colder air to drop southward toward the Bering Strait. Not going to make it just yet. Looks like pockets of rainfall there across the Brooks Range and into the Kotzebue Sound region. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf doesn't move very much, and most of the showers we see on the map toward southeast are actually on the other side of the higher terrain there. As we look at south central and southwest, a drier day for Wednesday, a little more sunshine up and down the lower and middle Yukon and the Kuskokwim Valley, and low pressure across the North Pacific, also sitting pretty much in place. Remember, this is a blocking pattern, a stable pattern, one that does not want to change very much, so all the chess pieces here on the table don't move very much in this kind of upper air weather pattern. Again, we'll look at that jet stream so you can see what I mean here in just a minute. As we get into Thursday, colder air is trying to march southward just a little bit, and most of this is going to swing pretty hard to the east and bypass most of south central and southeast. We will see an increased chance for some showers across central and southern parts of southeast. There will be some showers across the upper Yukon and the upper Tanana Valley into the Copper River Basin perhaps, but probably not a whole lot further south than that. A northerly flow will try and keep things fairly dry. We'll probably see more clouds across south central. The west coast still looks pretty dry and stable. High pressure still in charge there near St. Lawrence Island at 1,030 millibars. Even stronger area of high pressure a little bit further southward. And to the west of that is where we get back into that stronger southerly flow. Let's take a look at temperatures quickly. 30s and 40s for just about all parts of Alaska. Some milder weather across southeast and southwestern Alaska tonight, upper 40s to about 50 degrees there. High temperatures for your Wednesday, not bad at all. We're looking at most areas in south central back in the mid to upper 60s. Talkeetna could be a really warm spot. Southeast, mid to upper 60s there, closer to 70 around Gustavus. 30s and 40s for the North Slope. 50s and 60s for the west coast, 49 in Nome, and 50s and 60s for parts of the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern chain, with St. Paul coming in near 51, Nunivak Island 53, and Barrow and Utqiagvik about 39 degrees for your Wednesday afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather now. MVFR conditions will be fairly widespread across the interior, especially the middle and upper Tanana and the upper Yukon valleys. And into the North Slope, you'll see a better chance of IFR conditions around the Beaufort Seacoast, generally east of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, and then down toward Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. For parts of the Gulf Coast, you'll see generally VFR conditions all the way around the Horn until you get south of Port Alexander and into the Clarence Strait and outside of the southern outer coast. A little bit of IFR out over the open water. Out west, IFR conditions are expected across the central Aleutians, stretching northward into St. Paul and St. George, and then generally west of Kiska and out towards Shemya. MVFR fairly widespread, though, across the Bering, and for many of our west coast villages there, including Nome, out toward Unalakleet, all the way out toward Amanak, Etolan Strait and Nunivak Island, and into the Kuskokwim Delta, and generally along the Bering Strait coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Not so much on the Pacific side, but just about all of the villages will experience some visibility reduction and lowered ceilings. As we get into the afternoon on Wednesday, watch for IFR to spread a little bit further west down into the Chukchi coast. For the Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass areas, IFR should continue for the most part there. Also looking for MVFR to be a little more fairly widespread across southern parts of southeast. Still looking at VFR, though, across central and northern parts of the Panhandle. Out west, we expect IFR to push a little bit further northward and get closer to parts of St. Lawrence Island. The central and eastern chain also looking at continued IFR, while most parts of the west coast, in the interior anyway, the upper Kuskokwim into the middle and lower Yukon valleys, and still parts of south central, most of south central in fact, should be VFR. As we get into your Thursday morning, IFR will linger across the Brooks Range, the upper Tanana, and the upper Yukon valleys. Some improvement should be noted across southern parts of southeast, but we're still looking at expansive VFR across most of the Gulf Coast and really most of southeast for that matter. Across the west, look for IFR conditions across the central chain, north towards St. Matthew and south towards St. George. Now, IFR conditions will spread a little bit further inland into the Kuskokwim Delta and the Yukon Delta as we get into your Thursday afternoon. Watch for IFR around the Denali National Park region and north of the Susitna Valley. And MVFR conditions will continue across many parts of the North Slope and areas across the Tanana River Valley. Most of south central and southeast, once again at this point, should be VFR. Let's take a look at your pass conditions. I think Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass are going to kind of flirt a little bit with MVFR in the morning, so I've put that option in here. It may not be considerably entirely all IFR, but there's a chance that you might see at least a brief window of MVFR before it leans over toward IFR in the afternoon. That process looks to be fairly certain. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass right now look pretty good. VFR conditions there, and again it looks like for Thursday as well. Rainy Pass trending toward VFR conditions as the day goes on. Windy Pass holding around MVFR. Same goes for Isabel Pass. Marginal conditions really most of the day. Improvements expected around Mentasta Pass through your Wednesday. Toneda Pass we expect to see visual flight rule as the day goes on. Portage Pass looking for VFR as the day goes on there, and Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to be listed at VFR for your Wednesday. Freezing levels indicate a pretty normal situation here for our Omega block. What is that? That's that upside down U-shaped pattern you'll see here in the jet stream in just a minute. It's pushing warm air northward, dragging cold air eastward, and stabilizing everything in between. Levels out across the west anywhere from 8 to about 12,000 feet. Up north, levels there around 6 to 8,000 feet. For southeast, between 8 and 10,000 feet. The air is pretty warm. Icing potential then is going to be pretty high up there. There might be a brief period where this drops down to about maybe 7 or 8,000 feet across some parts of the central and eastern Brooks Range. That would be my greatest concern and place I'd look for trouble first on this chart tomorrow. So keep your eye on that if you're concerned about levels up north. Otherwise, no big deal for most parts of Alaska. Now, here is that Omega pattern. You can see the Omega shaping up here. Kind of looks like a crazy octopus a little bit. This ridge of high pressure is rough, tough, and hard to bluff. Does not want to move, and it is locked in the pattern. You can see it echoed below at 9,000 feet. High pressure sitting south of the eastern chain, a broad westerly flow coming into Alaska, and then low pressure across the Gulf, driving in winds around 10 to 20 knots across southeast. Much stronger winds here across the central and western chain, 15 to as high as 45 knots in some cases there, and westerlies at 35 knots, both at 9,000 feet and at 3,000 feet. Here's our ridge again. Here's our low on either side. And you can see the southerly flow for a good part of southeast, northerly dry winds for south central, westerlies in the interior, and strong southerlies out across the chain. And that's really where we're going to have trouble for turbulence tomorrow from Kiska eastward toward Adak and Atka. A little bit of chop for southwest in the eastern chain, and also across some of the western Brooks Range passes there below 4,000 feet.
We have cleaned over 1,500 miles of shoreline now.
Basically, it comes down to just human muscle. I mean, we use chainsaws and knives.
We find stuff from like Russia and China and Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia. It really doesn't matter where it comes from. We all just have to clean it out.
Our goal right now in the next 10 or 11 days before the end of this year is just to see how much we can collect before we get to remove it.
What you see on the beach is a fraction of what's out there. You can pretty much break it down into 3 or 4 things. Water bottles, a lot of water bottles, styrofoam, fishing nets, fishing buoys. And that's 99% of what you find on the beach. Basically just go along with chainsaws and muscle and get the garbage, put it in sacks, and then from there we haul it up above the log jam so it's out of any heavy surf or winter storms if it's going to stay there for the year, and put it in super sacks. So yeah, we just progressively work down the coast, just day in and day out.
We have like daily goals for ourselves that, like, if we're working at a pretty good rate, we'd like to keep on pace with about, like, I don't know, about 20 to 25 super sacks a day. So this is pile 102, and in this pile right now we have 2 super sacks and 1 set of buoys. June 23rd here, this is what we've done today. We're up to 25 super sacks on the day, and I think for now we'll call it and just keep cleaning until tomorrow.
My name is Hannah, and I represent a organization in Japan called Japan Environmental Action Network. With over 20 people working together to clean up the beach, this is amazing. Like, we all need to work together to, clean up the beach as much as possible. So like every single time I go back to Japan, I talk to the fishermen, and the fishermen's like, it's a joke, but they're like, if you find any buoy with my logo, you gotta bring it back, and like always looking out for that stuff.
The crew's awesome. I mean, we're all skiers or snowboarders, and we're all friends. I mean, we're all good friends. My dad started it. He's the man behind the desk. He makes the ball roll for sure. He works hard. He doesn't give up easy, which is good.
This stuff is uplifted quite a ways during the earthquake. Well, I think my bag's about full already. Yep. I'm gonna take a quick look back in here. Somebody else is back here. The thing about marine debris is it's kind of a hidden problem. Unless you're out there, especially on these remote beaches that are so heavily impacted, people don't see it. I remember probably a good 20 years ago, I was out on the outside of Montague Island, flew out there, and I was just utterly astounded by all the garbage out there. You walk out there and you wade through this stuff and you go, this isn't right, this shouldn't happen.
I think a lot of it's just awareness. I mean, I've been boating out here for a long time, and I wasn't even aware of how extensive the marine debris problem is out here, but it's a consumer world out there for sure. I mean, I don't know where people's values are, I guess, but mine is you got to kind of have a little bit of respect for the environment, and considering we live in it, especially in Alaska. I mean, a lot of people like the outdoors and like to be part of the outdoors. That's why they live here, and it's they don't necessarily want to see it trashed.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time now for a look at your sea ice update, and this from our Alaska Sea Ice program. You'll notice that bright white area here is still the high concentration areas of ice. Some of that is certainly multi-year ice and will become so again after we pass the ice birthday coming up here in October. One thing to really point out there, here's Kaktovik, and notice this thin strip of high concentration ice very close to the barrier islands. And just inside that, back into the marginal ice zone, that light blue color you see. There's several pockets like that. Here's another area just north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And one thing that we are getting from the Alaska Sea Ice program is that there is not a whole lot of high concentration ice inside the barrier islands. We don't expect that to change, but it is certainly there. And as weather systems are coming from west to east, with wraparound northerly flow behind that, that has the potential of moving some of that higher concentration ice around, but probably not at this point inside the barrier islands. So keep that in mind as you're making your plans. Make sure that as you are making your plans, you're checking in with weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. That is the latest update from the Sea Ice Edge and the analysis there with the concentration maps and the thickness maps there that will help you make better decisions, as well as the outlook for the season to come. And at any time, feel free to give the Alaska Sea Ice program a call. They're happy to help you with the information that you need about sea ice in the Arctic waters. Let's take a look at the forecast now for southeastern Alaska. 10 to 20 knots on the inside. You're looking at northerly flow out of Skagway and Haines in the Lynn Canal. Light northeasterlies in Stevens Passage, a little bit more of a northerly flow in the Clarence Strait, up to 3 foot seas expected there. And then offshore winds across the outer coast, the strongest of which will be south of Port Alexander and south of Sitka, looking at easterlies 20 knots or so with about 6 foot seas coming out of the Dixon entrance. Lighter winds up north, still blowing out of the northeast though. By Thursday, we start to see a little bit more of an influence of low pressure working its way closer to the coast. You can see that draw coming in offshore. Light winds for most areas with the exception of the Lynn Canal, 20 knots there with 4 foot seas. South central winds coming in around 15 to 20 knots most areas. Some stronger gusts though with this northerly flow coming out of Cordova and the Hitchinbrook entrance. Look for 4 foot seas there in the northern Gulf, 5 to 7 foot seas across the Barrens, 25 to 30 knots there. Looking for northerlies in Cook Inlet up to 15 knots. Winds subside just a little bit there around the Kenai Peninsula and in Prince William Sound, but we'll still keep winds up around the Barren Islands. Looking for 25 knots there with 5 to 7 foot seas on Thursday. For Bristol Bay, expect a light northwest breeze, 15 knots, 1 foot seas there, 2 foot seas down the coast, not bad at all. 4 to 5 foot seas across the North Pacific waters, 20 knots on either side of Kodiak Island with 3 to 6 foot seas there as we get into your Wednesday. For Thursday, up westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots. You're looking at about 3 to 4 foot seas on either side. Seas pick up just a little bit across the Bering, anywhere from 2 to 3 foot seas expected for your Thursday. Otherwise, 15 knot winds in most cases there from AKwx down toward Perryville and Sandpoint. Could be as high as 20 knots from the north and west with a 6 foot sea. For the Aleutians, slightly higher seas again around Adak and Atka. The winds are going to be stronger here. Small craft advisories for many locations, anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas in a lot of regions, up to 9 foot seas there from Kiska to Adak, and then south of Atka all the way out toward Nikolsky, you can expect 8 to 9 foot seas on that south and easterly flow, feeding into low pressure. And as that gently moves northward a little bit, you'll see the winds correspond to a more of a north or a southeasterly direction, I should say. 25 to 30 knots, expecting 5 to as high as 12 foot seas in the area as we get into your Thursday. For Nikolsky to Unalaska, a south and a westerly flow will develop. Seas remain generally small on the north side, but on the south side could be as high as 5 to 7 feet. Across the west coast, 15 to 20 knots at their strongest, 5 to 6 foot seas in some cases, 9 foot seas around St. Matthew for your Wednesday. For Thursday, winds diminish in many areas, 10 to 15 knots. You're looking at 3 to 4 foot seas. In most cases, St. Matthew up to 5 foot seas, and northerlies for St. Paul and St. George, remaining light for your Thursday afternoon. Look for a westerly flow across the Beaufort Sea on Wednesday, 4 to 5 foot seas in the open waters, south and westerlies for most of the Chukchi coast, up to 25 knots though, 7 foot seas there. Winds diminish in all areas for Thursday, still holding on to a northwest flow around the Beaufort Sea coast as we get into Thursday afternoon. And again, expecting some ice to move around in this area between Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik toward the end of the week. Make sure you're staying safe. Here's a look at the weather map. Colder air will be dropping southward toward the Brooks Range as we get into tonight, looking for periods of rain and snow along the coast, and rain and some fog certainly for many areas there. Keep that in mind as you're flying around. Dry conditions across the Gulf Coast. Most of the weather will stay in the north and the east as we get into Wednesday. Stronger winds across the central chain. That's where turbulence can be found as we get into Wednesday and Thursday for sure. A better chance for rain showers across southern parts of southeast, and showers move southward into the interior toward Thursday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.